It started with a scream so loud, so raw, that people thought it came from a wild animal. But no, it was human. A woman's scream filled with agony, confusion, and terror. It was 2:34 a.m. The residents of Block 19 in Zazaza City Estate were fast asleep, but lights began to flick on like a chain reaction. Doors creaked open. Phones lit up. Someone called security. Another screamed, "Who's that? What's happening?" By the time the estate guards reached apartment 3F, the sight they met was not just confusing, it was disturbing. The woman, Adiz, a 28-year-old freelance fashion designer, was lying half-naked on the pavement, her mouth wide open, eyes rolling back. Surrounding her were clothes, her clothes, but they were soaked. Not with water. With something thick and dark. Someone whispered, "Is that blood?" Another muttered, "But where's the wound?" The clothes looked wet, but Adiz's body was dry, bone dry. Her face was twisted as though she had seen something no human should see. And the clothes were still warm, like they'd just been pulled from someone else's body. "What happened here?" the security officer asked, his torch shaking in his hand. No one had an answer. Then someone noticed something. The window to Adiz's bedroom was open. Her balcony had clothes hanging on the line earlier that day. But now, the line was empty. And one bold woman, Madame Ijeoma, muttered as she stared into the night. "They told her. I warned her. Never leave clothes outside at night." The morning after Adiz's scream, the entire Block 19 estate buzzed with whispers. Neighbors formed small groups near their balconies, in car parks, and by the security post. The estate's WhatsApp group exploded with messages, photos, voice notes, and wild theories. Was it madness? Was she attacked? Spiritual something, if you ask me. Did you see those clothes? Jai. But while others were gossiping, one person stayed quiet, Madame Ijeoma. She was the oldest tenant in the estate. Some said she was over 70, but nobody really knew. She ran a small laundry service from her apartment. For years, people brought their stained suits, bridal gowns, and uniform shirts to her, and she always returned them fresh like magic. She lived alone, rarely went out, and never spoke much. Until now. By noon, Madame Ijeoma did something she hadn't done in years. She walked to the center of the estate with a wrapper tied firmly around her chest, her grey hair covered in a black scarf. She stood near the children's playground, her voice firm as she called out. "Listen, all of you. If you like yourself and your family, never. I repeat, never leave your clothes outside after sunset." People paused. Some chuckled. Others glanced at each other. Mama, na wetting be this one now, a young man said, half smiling. But she didn't smile back. "You think it's funny?" she asked, eyes burning with warning. "That girl at Adiz, she no just faint for ground like that. The spirits touched her. That cloth she wear last night, she left it on her line overnight. They touched it. Entered it. When she wore it again, they entered her." A few people laughed nervously. "Madam, Abig, this one na city o. No be village story time." But others stayed quiet. Especially one woman, Mrs. Igbona, who hadn't told anyone that her own 6-year-old daughter woke up that same morning with scratches on her chest. The only strange thing? She had worn a singlet that had stayed on the balcony overnight. Madame Ijeoma raised her voice. "You people don't know anything. Spirits no day live only for village. They move. They watch. And now, something has come to this estate. I warned before. I'm warning again. If cloth touch moonlight and stay until after midnight, forget it. The spirits will find it. And if you wear it again, you're finished." She looked around. Her eyes locked with the estate chairman's. "Tell your residents. If they don't want what happened to that girl to happen again, remove your clothes before dark. Or you will invite death into your home through the thread." The place went quiet. Madame Ijeoma turned and walked away. That night, some people laughed at her. Others forgot her words. But one man, Mr. Jide, who sold clothes in a boutique, rushed home early and pulled every piece of clothing from his line. He wasn't ready to test if Madame Ijioma's warning was true. Not after what happened to Adiz. But for one teenager named Tochi, the warning sounded like a challenge. And Tochi was already planning to prove it was all superstition. Tochi was 17, tall and skinny with loud confidence and fast fingers. He was always online, always recording something for his YouTube channel called the Zazaza Street Files. His friends, Maid, Junior, and Sharon, followed him everywhere, ready to capture content, prank strangers, and expose myths. And when they heard what Madame Ijeoma said in the estate playground, Tochi's eyes lit up like Christmas. "Guys, this is the next episode," he declared. "Let's leave our clothes outside tonight and show the world that it's all lies. No spirit, no Warala. It's just old woman stories." Sharon raised an eyebrow. "But what about that girl? Adiz? Maybe she's sick. Or she fainted from heat. People day overhype things. But her clothes were wet with something," Maid added quietly. "Blood, dye, ketchup, who knows? But guess what? If it's real, we'll catch it on camera. If not, we'll prove once and for all that Madame Ijeoma is just crazy." Junior, the quietest among them, hesitated. "I don't like playing with spirits, oh." Tochi laughed. "Then don't play. Just help me record." That evening, Tochi prepared his balcony like a movie set. He brought out for items of clothing a red hoodie, a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and a pair of socks. Each one had a hidden camera attached, connected to his phone through a live feed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tochi said into his camera. "Welcome to the Ghost Fabric Challenge. If anything happens to these clothes tonight, you'll see it live. And if nothing happens, I expect Madame Ijeoma to come and wash my clothes for the rest of the year." Maid laughed behind the camera. "You day mad." By 7:30 p.m., the clothes were hung. The sky was already turning deep blue. Downstairs, lights blinked across other apartments. Somewhere in the distance, someone was frying a kara. A baby cried. Generator engines hummed. But on Tochi's balcony, the atmosphere felt heavier. At 11:47 p.m., Junior, who had been watching the live feed with headphones, suddenly pulled them off. "I think I saw something move." Tochi ran over. "Play it back." They rewound the footage. The red hoodie swayed. But there was no wind. "Could be rats or air," Maid said. "No," Junior said. Look again." The hoodie swayed, then paused. The left sleeve slowly lifted, like someone invisible had slipped an arm inside it. Then, snap! The video feed cut. The screen turned black. Sharon jumped. "What happened?" Tochi ran to the balcony and found nothing. The hoodie was gone. Only the jeans, shirt, and socks remained. "Someone's playing games," Tochi muttered. But he didn't notice that the socks had turned slightly darker at the toes, like they had been dipped in ink. Or something thicker. They brought in the remaining clothes and locked the door. Tochi laughed nervously as he posted the video online. But later that night, at 3:06 a.m., he sat up suddenly in bed. His nose was bleeding. And a small piece of red cloth, exactly the same color as the hoodie, was clenched in his left hand. Tochi didn't tell anyone about the piece of red cloth in his hand. At first, he thought he had dreamed it. But when he woke up fully and turned on the light, there it was, crumpled in his palm, damp and slightly warm like it had just been pulled from a stranger's back. He checked his window. Closed. Checked his door. Still locked. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cloth. It was rough now, not smooth like the hoodie he wore in videos. One edge looked burned. The other edge had thread that moved. Not blowing, moving. Like tiny worms inside. Tochi dropped it quickly. Something about it made his stomach twist. By morning, he had convinced himself it was all part of a prank. Maybe Maid or Sharon placed it there to scare him. But when he asked them in the estate WhatsApp group, they all swore they hadn't. "Guy, I even had bad dreams last night," Maid texted. "I heard whispers near my bed," Sharon added. "I'm not doing again," Junior wrote. "Delete me from that group challenge." Tochi ignored them. He didn't want to look afraid. But that same afternoon, his younger sister Amaka ran into the living room crying. "What is it?" he asked. She pointed to the laundry basket near the back door. "My school uniform moved." He laughed. "Maybe lizard entered the cloth." "No," she shouted. "It moved like hand inside. I saw it. I saw fingers." Tochi walked to the laundry basket. The uniforms were dry, folded. But the white shirt on top looked different, creased like someone had gripped it tightly. He picked it up slowly. The back of the shirt had 3 long, thin tears, as if claws had raked it. Goosebumps spread over his skin. Just then, his mother entered the house from work, carrying groceries. "Amaka, why are you shouting?" she asked. She said her cloth moved, Tochi replied, forcing a laugh. "Maybe rat." His mother dropped her bag instantly. "You left clothes outside last night, didn't you?" Tochi hesitated. "Only for one video. It was just small prank." His mother's face changed. Fear crept into her eyes. She walked over, grabbed the torn uniform from his hands, and sniffed it. Then she hissed and dropped it like hot yam. "You've invited something into this house." Tochi laughed nervously. Mummy, are you like Madame Ijeoma now?" She stared at him. "I am from Okigwe, Tochi. I know what I've seen in my life. There are things you don't play with. You think spirits care if you're in a city? Spirits don't need trees or shrines to move. Just fabric. Just thread. Just one opening." That night, she gathered every piece of clothing in the house and prayed over them. She burned the piece of red cloth he found in his hand. As the flame touched it, it released a smell like spoiled eggs and dead flowers. And as the smoke rose, Amaka suddenly screamed from her room. When Tochi rushed in, he saw her struggling in her sleep, arms clawing at her own body, while the white school shirt floated above her bed like it was being worn by a ghost. Amaka's scream shook the entire apartment. Tochi stood frozen at the doorway of her room. The white school shirt was still hovering mid-air, sleeves twisting like arms trying to grip something or someone. Amaka thrashed on the bed, eyes shut, mouth open, sweat pouring from her face like water from a tap. Their mother didn't speak. She didn't shout. She simply ran to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of anointing oil and her wrapper tied tight. Without hesitation, she splashed the oil toward the shirt and shouted, "Any spirit hiding in cloth, catch fire now." The shirt dropped. Just like that. Amaka gasped awake, chest heaving like she had run 10 miles. She looked around wildly. "Mummy? Brother Tochi?" Her mother rushed to her and pulled her close, whispering prayers in her ear. Tochi stood there, shaken. This wasn't a prank anymore. This wasn't something he could post online with clickbait titles. This was real. Terrifying. And happening in their home. Later that night, their mother locked the door to the laundry room and said no one must enter. Tochi didn't sleep. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, phone on his chest, fan spinning above him. But even with the noise of the fan, he kept hearing something. Rustling. Like clothes moving against each other. He sat up. The sound was coming from the corridor. Slowly, he tiptoed out, holding his phone with the torch on. The rest of the flat was dark. Amaka's door was closed. His mother's door too. But the rustling got louder. He followed it to the laundry room. The door was locked, just like his mother said. But the sound, it was definitely coming from inside. Swish. 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 He bent down, shining the light under the door. What he saw made him drop the phone. A shadow was moving across the floor, not a person's shadow. It had no feet. Just a long, floating shape that twisted like cloth in water. And there were more than one. 3. 4, 5. All swirling under the door, dragging long dark arms behind them. Tochi backed away slowly. His phone screen had cracked when it hit the floor, but the torch was still on. He didn't touch the laundry door again. He didn't speak to the shadows. He simply walked backward to his room and locked the door. The next morning, his mother acted like nothing happened. She cooked yam porridge and fed Amaka gently. She told Tochi to eat before it got cold. He wanted to ask about the shadows, about the flying shirt, about the fire and oil and prayers. But she said only one thing as she cleaned her hands with a kitchen towel. From now on, no cloth stays in this house without prayer. That day, Tochi quietly deleted the Ghost Fabric Challenge video from YouTube. But it was already too late. Because someone else had copied the video. And someone else had tried the same challenge in Block 22, across the city. And they had left a wedding gown outside overnight. Block 22 was in the upscale side of the city. Tall buildings, electric gates, private security, CCTV everywhere. The kind of place where people thought ghosts couldn't enter. But evil doesn't need permission. It only needs an opening. When Tochi's video went viral, before he deleted it, a woman named Belinda had watched it from her shiny, marble-tiled apartment. She was in her early 30s, a wedding planner and influencer who believed nothing in the world was stronger than science and makeup. What nonsense, she muttered as she watched the video. She wore a white bathrobe and had a glass of red wine in her hand. All these people with their village mentality. Spirits in cloth? Rubbish. But something inside her itched. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe, just maybe, something darker wanted her attention. Because right there in her guest room, hanging freshly dry cleaned, was a wedding gown. Not just any gown. It belonged to her client, Amarachi, who was supposed to get married in 2 days. A flawless Vera Wang masterpiece flown in from Italy. It shimmered under the light like moon on water. Belinda walked in and stared at it. Then, without thinking too much, she opened the glass door to her balcony and hung the dress outside. She even snapped a photo of it and posted it on her Instagram story with the caption, "No spirit will touch this. Only dry breeze and expensive perfume." She smiled and sipped her wine. She slept like a queen that night. But woke up like a prisoner. At 4:07 a.m., she sat up suddenly. Her ears were ringing. A strange humming sound filled her head. It wasn't from her air conditioner. It was coming from the balcony. She stepped into her slippers and walked slowly toward the glass door. The wedding gown was still there. But it was no longer hanging. It was dancing. Floating slightly, sleeves twirling like arms, the hem spinning lightly as if being worn by an invisible bride. Belinda froze. The balcony was completely still. No wind. No fan. No movement except the gown. Then she saw it. A black thread, long and thin, unraveling from the chest area of the gown. It slithered like a snake and slid along the railing, down toward the floor, disappearing under the tiles. Belinda turned to run back inside, but the glass door slammed shut behind her. She screamed and banged on the glass. No one answered. Then the gown stopped dancing. It turned, yes, turned, to face her. Even though it had no head, no face, no body inside, she felt its eyes. Felt them crawl into her brain. The gown moved toward her. She backed up, heart racing, tears falling. It reached her and wrapped itself around her like a second skin. Tight. Suffocating. She couldn't scream. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the balcony, the gown fell to the floor, neatly folded. But Belinda was no longer there. Just her slippers. And a strand of black thread slowly rolling toward the drain. In the city of Oguama, people respected tailors. After all, tailors made you look rich even if your wallet was empty. They stitched confidence into your sleeves and pride into your trousers. But there was one tailor nobody liked to visit after sunset. Mama Kulu. Her shop was on the edge of Oguama's busiest street, beside a dusty bookshop that hadn't opened in years. By day, Mama Kulu seemed normal. Quiet. Focused. Her wrinkled hands moved quickly, threading needles and pressing cloths. But after dark, something changed. People said her light stayed until 2 or 3 a.m. Some swore they heard laughter coming from inside. Not human laughter, but high, broken, crackling giggles that rose and fell like a haunted radio signal. And most disturbing of all, they said her mannequins moved. Nobody could prove it. But no one could deny that every cloth sewn by Mama Kulu had a strange energy, too sharp, too alive, as if the fabric was listening. So when Amarachi's wedding gown was found in pieces on a roadside gutter the morning after Belinda's disappearance, it didn't take long for whispers to begin. "Take it to Mama Kulu," said Amarachi's aunt, desperate. "She is our last hope." "The wedding is tomorrow." Amarachi agreed, reluctantly. She arrived at the old tailor's shop by 5 p.m. with the torn gown folded carefully in a black nylon bag. The fabric was cold and still wet, even though the sun had been scorching all day. Mama Kulu didn't smile when she saw the cloth. She didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Leave it. Come back at midnight." Midnight? Amarachi asked, confused. "That is when I sew things the world cannot explain." Amarachi hesitated, but she nodded and left. That night, curiosity burned her like pepper in the eyes. At 11:45 p.m., she sneaked out of the house and took a bolt ride to Mama Kulu's shop. She stood outside, watching through the window. What she saw chilled her soul. Mama Kulu wasn't alone. For dark figures surrounded her sewing table. Not people, but shadows, shaped like men, with hollow heads and twisting arms. They were speaking to her, not with mouths, but through movement. One pointed at the torn wedding gown on the table. Another touched her needle. Mama Kulu nodded and began to sew. Her hands were moving fast, too fast. The thread she used wasn't normal. It was red. But not red like dye, red like blood. And it pulsed. As she stitched, the shadows began to fade, one by one, until only one remained. It leaned close and whispered something into Mama Kulu's ear. Amarachi couldn't hear the words. But Mama Kulu suddenly paused. She looked directly at the window. At Amarachi. Eyes wide. Unblinking. Then, she smiled, a strange, empty smile, and said loudly, "Your gown is ready, but the spirit inside it now belongs to you." Amarachi ran. She didn't wait to see the gown. Didn't wait to hear more. But she would soon learn something even worse. The wedding must still hold. And she would wear that gown, whether she wanted to or not. The sun rose slow and silent on the morning of Amarachi's wedding. But inside her heart, there was no joy. Only fear. Her body shook as her aunt helped her zip up the gown Mama Kulu had finished. The fabric was smooth but too cold. The lace itched against her skin. The veil fluttered without wind. And the mirror, oh, the mirror wouldn't reflect her clearly. It was foggy. Just her outline. Nothing more. "Amma, you look so beautiful," her aunt whispered with tears in her eyes. But Amarachi didn't respond. Because every time she blinked, she saw something else. A woman, no, a figure, in the mirror wearing the same gown, but standing behind her, breathing slowly, patiently. She wanted to scream. But she kept quiet. The wedding was scheduled for 10 a.m. at St. Sylvanus Cathedral, a grand church with stained glass windows and long wooden pews. Everything had been paid for. The choir rehearsed. The guests arrived in bright colors and perfumes that filled the air like flowers. The cameras were ready. The drinks were chilled. There was only one problem. The groom didn't show up. His name was Dapo. A banker. A calm, intelligent man who had never missed an appointment, not even for a haircut. But now, he wasn't answering calls. Wasn't replying to messages. His best man, Femi, was panicking. He left the house. Femi said to the pastor. He even wore his suit. An hour passed. Then 2. Still no Depo. The guests began whispering. People stared at Amarachi, standing at the altar alone, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Suddenly, the church lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then steady. The organ began to play by itself, long, low notes that no one had touched. The crowd went quiet. Then the door opened. And in walked a man in a black suit. Face covered with a white veil, like the bride's. He walked slowly, each step echoing. No one could see his face. "Is that Depo?" the pastor asked. But Femi said, "No. That's not him." The figure walked up to Amarachi and took her hand. His skin was ice. He didn't speak. Didn't smile. Didn't blink. But Amarachi, she couldn't move. Something inside her told her to run. To shout. To pull away. But her hand stayed locked in his. As if she had no choice anymore. Then, the figure slowly removed the white veil from his face. Gasps filled the church. Because under that veil was nothing. Just swirling dark smoke in the shape of a man's head. 2 glowing white dots where eyes should be. And a mouth that opened wide, but didn't move. Still, everyone heard the voice. "You wore the gown. Now, we are joined." Then he turned to the priest and said, "Continue." And the priest, eyes glazed, voice trembling, began the vows. The wedding was done. Not the kind of wedding with joy, dancing, and sweet music. No. This one ended with silence. After the strange figure in the black suit said "I do," the church lights blinked one last time and the organ let out a final, deep sound, like a cry. Guests didn't clap. They didn't take pictures. Most of them stood frozen in their seats, unable to move, their eyes glassy and mouths slightly open like they had forgotten how to speak. And the husband? He walked Amarachi down the aisle without touching the floor. His feet hovered slightly, like wind holding him up. When they stepped outside, the sun disappeared. Even though it was just 1:43 in the afternoon, the sky turned grey-black, like evening during a thunderstorm. But no rain came. Just stillness. Amarachi was not herself. Her eyes were empty. She smiled like someone else was moving her lips. Even when her mother ran to her screaming, "Who is that man?" "Where is Depo?" Amarachi said softly, "My groom has come." The strange man turned his smoky face toward the crowd and whispered one word. "Sleep." Everyone in the compound dropped to the ground. One by one. Unconscious. Except for Amarachi. And him. They entered a waiting car, her father's black Prado. No one drove it. The car moved by itself. It carried them to an abandoned hotel on the edge of the city called Silver Rocks Inn. The hotel had been closed for 5 years after a mysterious fire. No one had entered it since. That's where the wedding night happened. Inside room 309. An old room with broken windows, burnt curtains, and a mattress that smelled of ash. The door opened by itself. The lights came on even though there was no electricity. He led Amarachi in. She didn't resist. She stood by the mirror and looked at her reflection. This time, she didn't see herself. She saw Belinda, the wedding planner, crying silently inside the mirror. Wearing the same gown. Trapped. Then the mirror cracked. The bed creaked. And the man in the black suit said, "Now, you belong to the fabric." He took off his jacket and laid it gently on the bed. It slithered like a living thing and wrapped around the pillow. Then, Amarachi turned slowly to him, her voice not hers anymore, and said, "What about the others?" The figure whispered, "They will come. All who leave cloth under the night sky, they invite us." Suddenly, the room became filled with sounds, soft whispers, cries, giggles, and footsteps. The walls pulsed like lungs. The TV came on by itself. On the screen, there were images of other people, men, women, children, all being surrounded by flying clothes, ghostly gowns, angry trousers with black threads twisting like snakes. Then it froze on a picture of Mama Kulu, sewing something with her eyes rolled back. The screen blinked. Then went off. Amarachi lay on the bed. The lights went off. And the screaming began. No one outside saw anything. But when the police were called the next day, all they found was a folded wedding gown on the bed. And a puddle of black thread dripping from the mattress to the floor. Oguama's central market was always loud. From sunrise to sunset, it echoed with the shouts of meat sellers, the calls of fruit women, and the bargaining cries of customers who never wanted to pay full price. But one morning, 3 days after Amarachi's cursed wedding, the market changed. It started at Mma Ijioma's baby shop. She was the only woman in Oguama who sold imported baby clothes, tiny gowns, soft singlets, socks that looked like candy, and blankets that smelled like lavender. She had just opened her shop, humming a gospel song, when she noticed something strange. The baby clothes were wet. Dripping. But the store was dry. The roof didn't leak. The window was shut. Confused, Mma Ijioma began to remove the clothes one by one. Each one wet. Cold. And worse, moving slightly. She dropped the last baby Onasi and stepped back, heart beating fast. Then she heard it. A cry. Not a loud baby cry. A soft, broken, hopeless sound. Like a newborn abandoned in the rain. "Who's there?" she called, looking around. No baby. No mother. Just racks of small, wet clothes. Then she heard the cry again. This time from inside the bundle of pink wrappers hanging on the left corner of the shop. She walked over slowly and picked it up. Inside was a tiny white baby cap. That was all. But when she touched it, her hand turned ice cold. And the cap whimpered. She dropped it and screamed. Her neighbor, a pepper seller, rushed in. "Ijioma, what is it?" Before she could answer, the sound came again, but now louder, and from every corner of the shop. The tiny shirts hanging on hooks began to sway, as if rocked by invisible hands. The baby blankets on the shelves started folding and unfolding by themselves. And then every single baby sock in the store began sobbing. Loud, heartbreaking, crying like dozens of unseen infants had suddenly filled the space. Women screamed. Some ran out of the market. Mma Ijioma fainted. When she woke up hours later, her shop was locked. She was in her home, surrounded by people asking questions. What happened? Where are the baby clothes? She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. That night, her daughter Ifunanya heard her mother speaking in her sleep. Repeating the same sentence. They wore the baby clothes at night, they left them outside. But the girl noticed something else. In the corner of their house, where her school uniform hung to dry, the wind didn't blow. The cloth wasn't swaying. Yet, it moved. Softly. Like something was breathing inside it. And that night, as Ifunanya lay in bed, she heard a whisper. "We want yours next." The nights grew colder after that incident in the market. No one could explain what had happened to Mma Ijioma's shop. People whispered that it was a curse, that clothes left outside after sunset had attracted something dark. Something dangerous. But life continued in Oguama, as it always did. The market opened every day, and the sound of people haggling over prices filled the air. Yet a strange tension had taken over the town. The whispers grew louder, especially after sunset. And in Ifunanya's house, the tension was thick. She had noticed it the first time the wind picked up after sunset. Her school uniform, which she always hung by the door to dry, began moving by itself. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light or just the wind pushing it back and forth. But this time, there was no wind. The air was still. And yet, the uniform swayed. Back and forth. Back and forth. Her heart skipped a beat. That night, when Ifunanya went to bed, she couldn't sleep. Her eyes kept darting to the corner of the room where her uniform hung. She pulled the blankets up to her chin, trying to block out the images of her mother's fainting spell earlier that day. But then, the uniform shifted. It was no longer just swaying. It was walking. Very slowly. One foot in front of the other, like a doll being controlled by invisible strings. The sleeve moved first, like it was raising its hand. Then the legs, the fabric brushing against the wall as it made its way toward the door. No. Ifunania's heart raced as she sat up, her body frozen in terror. She wanted to scream, to run, to wake up her parents. But her voice wouldn't come. It was as though her mouth had been sealed shut by something unseen. The uniform reached the door, stopped for a moment, and then the door opened by itself. Ifunania's eyes were wide with disbelief. The uniform stepped out, just like a person walking into the night. And the door closed behind it. For a long moment, Ifunania just sat there, unable to move. Her pulse pounded in her ears, the room spinning. But then, something pulled her from the bed. The whispers. Faint at first, but then louder, growing stronger. "We want yours next." The words came from somewhere behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. Her feet moved before she could stop them. She rushed to the door and flung it open. The night air was cold, and the moon was full, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Ifunania stepped outside, her heart racing. She called for her uniform, but there was no answer. Then she saw it. Just ahead. The school uniform, standing in the middle of the street. Its sleeves twitched. The pants' legs rustled like something was shifting inside. But there was no wind. And there, in the middle of the street, stood another figure, a tall shadow. It was a person. No, it was a thing. Its face was blurred, its body covered in the same dark smoke that had surrounded the man at Amarachi's wedding. It wore clothes, but the clothes weren't real. They were like a second skin, floating, shifting, breathing. It spoke, but the voice wasn't human. It sounded like fabric being torn in the wind. "You left it out. And now we're here." Ifunania's eyes widened. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Her feet felt as though they were stuck to the ground. The figure raised its arm, and the uniform lifted into the air, floating toward it like a piece of cloth on a breeze. The figure whispered once more, "We collect what's left behind. All who leave their clothes after dark must join us." And before Ifunania could scream, the figure reached out, its hand made of twisting threads, and touched her skin. Her body went cold. Like she was being wrapped in a cocoon made of ice. The morning after Ifunania's encounter with the strange figure, the city of Oguama felt wrong. The streets were quieter than usual. People moved with purpose, but their eyes darted, looking over their shoulders, as if they feared the shadows would reach out and grab them. But Ifunania couldn't shake the image of the dark figure, the thing that wore the clothes of the forgotten, that drifted in the moonlight. She couldn't stop hearing the voice, the whisper, "We collect what's left behind." It had touched her skin, its cold fingers sinking deep into her soul. The memory of that touch made her shiver even in the heat of the day. She hadn't told anyone about what happened. How could she? No one would believe her. They'd think she was crazy, or worse, cursed. Instead, she stayed locked in her room, staring at the door, waiting for the whispers to come again. But they didn't. That night, when the sun set and the shadows crept across the city, Ifunania felt the pull again. The air in her room grew cold. Her bed, which she had slept in for years, felt foreign now, like a place she no longer belonged. Suddenly, she heard it, the sound of fabric brushing against the floor. A soft rustling, like clothes being moved. Slowly, she turned her head toward the corner where her clothes hung. There was a dress she hadn't worn in months, bright red, a gift from her aunt. It was swaying gently, though the air was still. Her pulse quickened. Then, the whispers came again. "We collect the forgotten, the left behind." She pulled the blanket over her head, hoping that would block out the voice. But the fabric of the blanket felt strange now, rough against her skin, as if it were made of something else. Something that wasn't meant to be touched by human hands. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching her. The wall seemed to press in on her, the air thick with something unseen. The clock on the wall ticked louder, the sound like a heartbeat. Knock. The knock at her door was soft, but it sent a shock of fear through her chest. "Who's there?" she called, her voice barely a whisper. But no answer came. Instead, the door creaked open by itself. Ifunania's heart stopped. She didn't dare move. She couldn't. A figure stood in the doorway. It was the collector. The same shadowy figure from the night before. But now, it wasn't just standing there. It was inside her room. Its body was still a blur of fabric and dark smoke, but this time it moved closer. The room grew colder, the air heavier with each step it took. The figure stretched out a hand, fingers long and twisted, like threads wound into long, bony limbs. It was reaching for something. Ifunania's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard in the streets. Her body trembled as she realized it wasn't just after the clothes that had been left out, it was after her too. Before she could even scream, the figure's voice filled the room. It was low, like fabric rubbing together. "You left your uniform outside, and now, we must take you." Its fingers brushed against her arm, and Ifunania screamed, but it was too late. The cold from its touch spread like a fire, wrapping her in layers of freezing fabric. She tried to pull away, but the figure's grip tightened, its other hand reaching for her school uniform that hung near the door. "Eno," she shouted, but it didn't matter. The figure lifted the uniform and held it in front of her. As soon as the uniform touched her, Ifunania felt herself being pulled into it. The fabric wrapped around her like an invisible force. Her body felt lighter, almost as though she was being drawn out of her own skin. The whispers grew louder. More voices joined in, all from the clothes that had been abandoned. "You should have obeyed. Now you belong to us." With one final pull, Ifunania was lifted from the floor. Her vision blurred, the room spinning as if she was being swallowed by the darkness. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the sound of fabric, the sound of forgotten clothes crying. Ifunania opened her eyes. It was dark, darker than any night she had ever known. At first, she thought she was still in her room, tangled in her blankets, maybe lost in a dream. But the cold was sharper now. It bit into her skin, and the air smelled of dust, like forgotten things that had been locked away for years. She sat up slowly, her body stiff, as though she hadn't moved in ages. When she tried to stand, her legs wobbled beneath her. She looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening, but all she could see was endless darkness. Then she heard it, a sound like rustling fabric. It was soft at first, like clothes being tossed about by an unseen hand. But as Ifunania's eyes adjusted, she realized that it wasn't just clothes. It was a sea of clothes, hanging on invisible lines. Dresses, shirts, trousers, old and worn, new and unused, swayed gently in the air as if moved by some ghostly wind. The place felt wrong. The air was thick, too thick to breathe easily. It made her chest feel tight, as if the very space she was in was closing in on her. "Where am I?" Ifunania whispered, her voice barely a breath. She looked around, but there was no answer. No sound except for the rustling of the clothes. And then she heard them. The voices. Low and almost sighing, they whispered in a language she couldn't understand. It wasn't a language of words, but of tangles and threads. It was like hearing the fabric of reality unraveling. Suddenly, one of the clothes, an old, faded red dress, fluttered in front of her, as if it had a mind of its own. It swirled in the air, drawing close to her face, until she felt the cold touch of fabric against her skin. "You are one of us now." Ifunania stepped back, her heart racing. She couldn't tell where the voice had come from. It wasn't from any one person, it was from everything around her. The voices of the clothes. The voices of those who had been left behind. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You left your clothes behind. Now they have claimed you." The voice was clearer now, as if the very fabric itself was speaking to her. The dress swirled around her, its hems brushing against her arms like a caress. "This is the wardrobe of lost souls." The voice continued. "The place where all the forgotten clothes come to rest." As Ifunania turned, she saw more clothes, more than she could count. Some were old, tattered, and faded with time. Others were brand new, their tags still attached. There were uniforms, wedding dresses, and even funeral clothes. All hanging in the air, suspended, waiting. "Who are you?" Ifunanya asked, her voice rising with fear. The dress before her fluttered, and then it seemed to take on a form. A face began to appear in the folds of the fabric. It wasn't a human face, but a face made of fabric, thread, and buttons stitched together in a twisted version of a smile. "We are the collectors," it whispered. "We are the ones who gather the clothes that have been forgotten by the living. You must join us." Ifunanya's eyes widened with terror. "No. I don't want to be part of this." But the voice was insistent. "You don't have a choice. You have been taken. And you will stay here forever until your clothes are returned. Until someone remembers you." Ifunanya tried to run, but the clothes seemed to move around her, closing in. They stretched like invisible hands, wrapping around her legs, her arms, pulling her back into the sea of forgotten fabric. She struggled, but it was no use. The fabric wrapped around her like chains. "There is no escape," the voice said, as if it were everywhere, surrounding her. "You are one of us now." Her breath quickened, and she began to panic. How did she get here? Why was she here? The dress, which had formed a face, tilted its head, as though it could sense her fear. "Only one thing can free you," it said, its voice growing softer now. "You must return what you have taken." Ifunanya's heart raced as the meaning of those words settled over her like a heavy weight. She had to return the clothes. She had to go back to the real world, to undo what she had done. But how? The fabric around her loosened for just a moment, and Ifunanya saw a faint light in the distance. It was dim, but it was a light nonetheless. She had to reach it. She had to escape. But the clothes were closing in again, tighter, faster. And then she heard another voice, familiar this time. "Ifunanya! Ifunanya, wake up!" Ifunanya blinked rapidly, struggling to make sense of her surroundings. Her heart pounded in her chest as her mind fought to adjust. The fabric, the voices, the cold, it was all gone. She was back in her room. The familiar walls of her small apartment stood around her. Her clothes were neatly folded in the corner, nothing unusual. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting soft shadows on the floor. The air was warm again, comforting even. But the weight of what had happened, the nightmare, the voices, the wardrobe of lost souls, hung over her like a dark cloud. "Ifunanya!" The voice called again. It was her mother. "Ifunanya, what is wrong with you?" her mother said, her voice sharp with worry as she rushed into the room. She knelt beside her daughter's bed, placing a hand on Ifunanya's trembling shoulder. "You were shouting in your sleep. You're soaked in sweat. What happened?" Ifunanya swallowed hard. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, the words stuck in her mouth. I saw something," she finally managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I saw the collector." Her mother's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "The collector," she repeated slowly, as if she didn't understand what her daughter meant. "There's no such thing, Ifunanya. You've been working too hard, that's all. You need to get some rest." But Ifunanya knew what she had seen. She knew what had happened. The collector wasn't just a bad dream. It was real. Her mother's voice softened, and she stroked Ifunanya's hair gently. "You're still just a child, my dear. These things, these stories, they're for old people, things to warn children about. You know the rules, never leave your clothes outside after dark. It's all just superstition." Ifunanya's thoughts raced. Superstition? The collector wasn't a superstition. She had felt the cold hands, heard the whispers. She had been there, in that other place, the place where the forgotten clothes went. But her mother's words stung, and a part of her wanted to believe that it was just a nightmare. Maybe it was all in her head. No. She knew the truth now. The collector was real, and she was caught in something much bigger than she understood. The pressure in her chest grew. "Mom, you don't understand. You don't know what happens to the clothes that are left out overnight. They take you." Her mother shook her head, as if dismissing the fear in her daughter's voice. "You've been reading too many of those old folk tales. Let's get you back to bed. You'll feel better in the morning." But Ifunanya couldn't sleep. Not after what she had seen. The collector, the forgotten souls, the clothes that had taken on a life of their own, it was all too real. And something in her told her that it wasn't over. The collector was still out there, waiting for her to slip up again, to leave another piece of clothing unattended. Suddenly, the wind howled through the cracks in the window, sending a chill down her spine. Ifunanya stood up abruptly, shaking her head. "I have to go," she said quickly, more to herself than to her mother. "Go? Go where?" her mother called out as Ifunanya grabbed her jacket and rushed toward the door. "I have to fix it," Ifunanya replied, her voice determined, yet laced with fear. She didn't have time to explain. The collector was waiting, and it was only a matter of time before it would come for her again. Her mother stood frozen in the doorway, her expression filled with confusion and worry. But Ifunanya didn't have time to explain. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. She ran out of the house, not stopping until she was outside, in the quiet, dark street. The city was still, too still for her comfort. The usual sounds of the night, distant cars, people talking, dogs barking, were eerily absent. But something else was there, something she couldn't explain. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Ifunanya stood at the edge of the street, looking up at the moonlit sky. The whispers of the forgotten clothes seemed to reach her again, but this time, they were louder, more urgent. "Return what you have taken," they seemed to say. She knew what she had to do. She had to go back to the wardrobe of lost souls. She had to return the clothes she had taken, she had to fix what she had done. But as she turned to head toward the place she had seen in her nightmare, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. It was the collector. Its voice came from behind her, low and chilling. "You can't run." The cold hand gripped Ifunanya's shoulder tightly, its touch like ice seeping into her skin. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't dare turn around. She could feel it, the presence, hovering behind her, the weight of its darkness suffocating everything around her. "You can't run, Ifunanya." The voice was colder than the wind itself, like the whispers of forgotten things echoing through the night. Ifunanya's heart pounded. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to take a step forward, the fear rising within her. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I will return what I took. I will fix this. I have to." The hand on her shoulder tightened, and she could feel the force of something pulling her backward, like invisible threads wrapping around her, dragging her back to the darkness. "You can't escape." The voice spoke again, this time with a trace of amusement, as though it enjoyed her fear. "You are ours now, Ifunanya. Just like the others." Suddenly, the street around her seemed to fade. The light from the moon dimmed, and the familiar city sounds of the night, traffic, distant chatter, the hum of life, began to dissolve into silence. Ifunanya's world was shrinking, the shadows closing in, the city vanishing into nothing. The weight on her chest grew heavier with every passing second. She had to get away, but no matter how hard she tried to move, her feet seemed stuck to the ground, unable to carry her forward. "Let me go," she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. But the hand on her shoulder didn't loosen. Instead, it became stronger, more suffocating, as though the very fabric of her reality was twisting and tightening. Then, in an instant, the world around her shifted. She was no longer standing in the quiet street. The city was gone, replaced by a cold, barren landscape of hanging clothes. The wardrobe of lost souls. Ifunanya's eyes widened in horror. She knew she had entered the place she had been trying to avoid, the place of the forgotten, and she could already feel the presence of countless others, trapped in the same endless cycle. "Welcome back." The voice of the collector came again, its tone smooth, almost mocking. The hand on her shoulder released, but she knew she was no longer in control. All around her, the clothes hung in mid-air, suspended by invisible threads, moving ever so slightly as if breathing. Some were ancient, their fabric worn thin by time. Others were crisp and new, waiting to be claimed. There were cloaks of darkness, dresses of pure white, suits that had never been worn. They swirled around her, as though the clothes themselves had become living, breathing things. "You see now, don't you?" The collector's voice echoed through the space, swirling with the fabric. "This is where they come when they are forgotten. The lost, the discarded, the overlooked. They belong to us now. And soon, you will too." Ifunanya's chest tightened as a sense of hopelessness washed over her. She wanted to run again, to escape this nightmarish place, but the clothes around her were moving, alive with a dark energy. They seemed to whisper to her, urging her to accept her fate, to accept her place in the collection. "I don't belong here," Ifunanya said, more to herself than anyone else. A low laugh bubbled up from the darkness. "You already do." Her mind raced, the fear gnawing at her every thought. What was she supposed to do now? Then, out of the swirling mass of clothes, she saw something, or someone, moving toward her. It was a figure, cloaked in shadows, its features obscured by a thick veil of cloth. "You must return what you have taken." The voice was soft, but urgent, almost pleading. Ifunanya's breath caught in her throat. This figure, it seemed familiar. "You have to leave. You can't stay here." The figure repeated, its tone more desperate this time. "Who are you?" Ifunanya asked, the question barely escaping her lips. The figure hesitated and then slowly lifted the veil, revealing a face she knew well. It was her own face. What are you?" Ifunanya stammered, her voice trembling. "How is this possible?" Her doppelganger smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I am you. I am what you will become if you don't return what was taken. The clothes will keep you here. Forever." "No," Ifunanya gasped, shaking her head. "I can't." "You must." The figure's voice grew softer, almost sorrowful. "There is no escape until you make things right. You cannot outrun the collector. You cannot outrun the forgotten." The ground beneath Ifunanya's feet began to shift, the fabric swirling faster around her. She felt herself being pulled in, the air thickening with the whispers, the cries of the lost. It was too much, her body, her mind, everything was beginning to break under the pressure. And then, she saw it. In the distance, through the swirling mass of clothes, was the doorway, a faint light, a sliver of hope. "You must return what you took, Ifunanya. It's your only chance." With a newfound urgency, Ifunanya turned toward the light, pushing through the sea of forgotten clothes, her body growing heavier with every step. But she wasn't sure if she could make it. Could she? And as she neared the light, she felt the presence of the collector, watching, waiting for her final move. Ifunanya's heart was racing as she pushed forward, her limbs heavy, like they were filled with lead. The clothes around her seemed to be closing in, the whispers growing louder with each step. The air was thick with tension, a sensation that gnawed at her from the inside out. She was so close now. The doorway was within reach, glowing faintly in the distance, a sliver of light amidst the oppressive darkness. But behind her, she could feel the collector drawing nearer, its presence looming like a shadow ready to consume her. "You can't leave, Ifunanya." The voice rang out, cold and final. It was the collector's voice, so chilling that it made her skin crawl. "You belong here, with the lost, the forgotten." Every part of her screamed to turn back, to give in, to accept the reality she had stumbled into. But something inside her burned with defiance, a flicker of hope that wouldn't be extinguished. "No," she whispered to herself. "I will not stay here. I won't become like them." With renewed strength, she took another step toward the light, her body trembling from both fear and the effort. The fabric around her seemed to tug at her, pulling her back, as though trying to stop her from escaping. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand wrap around her ankle, pulling her down. She stumbled, falling to the ground. Panic surged within her as she reached out, her fingers grasping at the nearest fabric, her own clothes, the one she had left hanging outside. "Let me go," she cried out, trying to shake off the unseen hand. But the more she struggled, the stronger the grip became, as though the clothes themselves were now part of the collector's power. They seemed to tighten around her, binding her to the ground as though they had a mind of their own. "You cannot escape." The voice came again, closer now, almost behind her. "You are ours, Ifunanya. Forever." Her chest tightened, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Was there truly no escape? Would she be trapped here, forever lost among the clothes of forgotten souls? Then she remembered the figure, the doppelganger. Her own face, urging her to return what she had taken. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the figure's words. "Return what you took." She had stolen something, the cursed fabric that had been left on her line after sunset. The fabric that had caused everything to spiral out of control. The collector had given it power, and now she had to take it back. But where? How? How could she undo what had been done? Her mind raced as the cold hand continued to tighten its grip, dragging her deeper into the darkness. She struggled harder now, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow and fast. And then she remembered. She hadn't just taken fabric. She had taken hope. She had taken freedom, not just for herself, but for the many others trapped in this place. The lost, the forgotten, the souls who had once walked the streets of Ahiara, leaving their clothes to dry on the lines, unaware of the curse they had invited upon themselves. Ifunanya's hands, trembling, reached down to the fabric she still held tightly in her grip. She pulled at it, ripping it free from her leg. The moment it detached, a strange sensation washed over her, a calm that she had not felt since this nightmare began. With a cry, she stood up, her legs still shaky, but she no longer felt the weight of the clothes pulling her down. She was free, for now. But how long would it last? "You cannot undo what has been done." The voice boomed, louder and angrier than ever before. The collector's presence was overwhelming, its power rippling through the fabric of the lost souls. But Ifunanya didn't flinch. She knew what she had to do. She ran toward the light, her body moving faster than it ever had before, the whispers of the lost souls calling out to her, their voices pleading, their hands reaching for her, desperate to drag her back into the endless dark. The light was growing brighter now, the doorway in sight. It seemed to pulse with energy, like the very heart of the world, offering her a chance at escape. But as she reached for it, she felt something sharp cut across her hand. She looked down, gasping in horror as a thread of fabric wrapped itself around her wrist, pulling her back. "You cannot escape," the collector roared. "You are one of us now." But Ifunanya refused to stop. With all the strength she had left, she yanked the fabric free, severing the tie that had bound her. And then, as she reached the threshold, she stepped through the doorway. Everything went black. When Ifunanya stepped through the doorway, the world around her seemed to collapse in on itself. The oppressive darkness that had clung to her for so long was gone, replaced by a soft, almost comforting light. She breathed deeply, her lungs filling with air that felt real, alive. Her body shook with exhaustion, but she felt a strange weightlessness, as though the burden she had carried for so long was finally lifted. She blinked rapidly, adjusting to the light. When she looked around, she found herself standing in a familiar place, the streets of Ahiara, the city where everything had begun. But something was wrong. The streets were eerily quiet. No bustling crowds, no sounds of laughter or chatter from the marketplace. The buildings loomed around her, their windows dark. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting. Ifunanya's chest tightened as she tried to take it all in. Had she returned? Was this reality, or had she simply entered another layer of the nightmare? Her eyes darted around, searching for something familiar, some sign that she had escaped the clutches of the collector. Then, she heard it. A soft rustling in the distance, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. She turned quickly, her heart racing once again, but there was nothing there. Just shadows stretching out in the dim light, stretching farther than they should. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing down the empty street. No answer. The silence pressed in on her, more suffocating than before. She began to walk, each step tentative, her eyes scanning the familiar city with new wariness. As she walked, the feeling of being watched returned, as though unseen eyes were following her every move. And then, she saw it. A clothesline, hanging in the distance, swaying gently in the breeze. The clothes on it seemed odd, as though they had been there for a long time. They were familiar, too familiar. Some were her own. No. She had already returned the fabric. She had broken free. This wasn't possible. But there they were, each piece hanging in the wind, like the threads of a forgotten story, woven into something darker than she had ever known. The clothes on the line were not the ones she had left out that night, they were the souls of those who had been taken before her. The lost. Her heart stopped. She could feel it now, the weight of her actions. The price of her escape. She had freed herself, yes, but in doing so, she had replaced herself with another. The fabric that had been taken was now woven into the very fabric of the city, the clothes line now standing as a reminder that nothing, not even escape, comes without cost. A soft whisper tickled the back of her mind, and she could almost hear the voice of the collector, lingering in the shadows. "You think you've escaped, Ifunanya," the voice said, quiet but insistent. "You are not free. You are just a piece of the puzzle now. You have joined the forgotten. You are one of us." The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. She had not broken the cycle. She had become a part of it. The clothes on the line were hers, but so were the clothes of others who had once lived in a hiara, people who had left their garments out at night, people who had ignored the warning, who had invited the Agwe spirits into their lives without realizing it. Ifunanya turned away from the clothes line, her breath shallow, the cold realization sinking deeper with each passing second. She had not truly escaped. The city around her seemed to shift. The once familiar streets twisted, and the buildings began to blur, as if the fabric of the world itself was unraveling. The wind picked up, howling through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it the whispers of the lost souls, urging her to return, to join them in the never-ending cycle. But Ifunanya refused. She had to fight. She had to find a way out, a real way out, before she too became just another forgotten soul hanging on the line. Her heart raced as she started walking faster, her mind spinning. She had to find the truth. What was the true nature of the collector? What did it want? Why were the lost souls so desperate? Could she undo what had been done? As she turned the corner, she nearly stumbled over something, a body. Her heart skipped a beat as she knelt down, her eyes wide in horror. It was a woman, dressed in rags, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow, staring up at Ifunanya with a look of recognition. "You," the woman whispered hoarsely. "You're the one who came through." The one who. Before she could finish, the woman's body seemed to disintegrate, vanishing into thin air, leaving nothing but a faint whiff of smoke behind. Ifunanya jumped back, her breath catching in her throat. What was happening? What was the true price of escape? The answer was clear, but terrifying. There was no escape from the collector's world. Not without a sacrifice. And the question lingered in her mind, what would she have to give up to truly break free? Ifunanya stumbled back from the spot where the woman had disintegrated, her mind spinning. The hollow look in the woman's eyes still haunted her. She hadn't spoken much, but the message had been clear, she was the next one. The streets of Ahiara now felt like a twisted labyrinth, shifting and closing in on her with every step she took. The buildings no longer seemed familiar, they had become unnatural, as though they were mere reflections of what had once been. Shadows crept from every corner, growing larger with each passing second. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The weight of everything pressing down on her was unbearable. Ifunanya had thought that crossing the threshold had meant freedom, but now she realized it had only meant she had entered a deeper trap, one woven into the very fabric of the world around her. A low whisper fluttered through the wind, and Ifunanya froze. "One of us?" She looked around but saw nothing. It was the voice again, the collector, its presence creeping through the air like a dark cloud. Its words were like a shackle, pulling her back into the abyss she had just escaped from. "You can never truly leave. You belong here now." Her hands trembled, her heart racing. The city around her seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, and the clothes on the line, once just an afterthought, now appeared alive, their threads vibrating, writhing as if they were reaching for her. Suddenly, she understood. The clothes were not just a physical part of the curse, they were the key. The souls trapped within the fabric were connected to the very essence of the city, bound by some ancient force. And she, Ifunanya, was now entangled in it, just as they had been. She had become part of the cycle, part of the fabric itself. But what did that mean for her? What was the price she had to pay for her escape? The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and she stumbled. The dark figure of the collector appeared before her, its form shifting in and out of focus, an ominous silhouette against the twisted cityscape. "You are nothing but a thread in my web, Ifunanya." The voice was low, almost a growl. "You were chosen, just like all the others. Now, you will join them." She backed away, panic surging through her veins. There had to be a way out. There had to be a choice. But how could she undo the curse that had taken hold of her? The collector's eyes, dark and void-like, fixed on her, sending a chill down her spine. "You think you can escape? The moment you took the fabric from the line, you sealed your fate." Ifunanya's breath came in short gasps. She had taken that fabric, yes, she had. But there had been no warning, no signs of the true nature of what she had done. She had been a victim, just like the others. But now, she had to break the cycle. She couldn't become just another forgotten soul. But how? The collector's form seemed to grow larger, its presence suffocating, as it moved toward her. "Join us." It was not a question, but a command. The words echoed in her mind as if the city itself had spoken them. It was too much to process. Ifunanya's mind reeled as she struggled to stay upright. The ground seemed to rise and fall beneath her feet, like the very earth was shifting in rhythm with the collector's voice. And then, the whisper came again, but this time, it was different. It was a voice she had heard before of her own. "You must make the sacrifice, Ifunanya. You must give up what you hold most dear. Only then can you break free." The realization hit her like a thunderclap. The sacrifice. It had to be something significant, something precious. But what? She thought of everything she had left behind. The life she had known, the family, the freedom. But there was more, something more intimate that held her heart, her memories, her very identity. Was she prepared to sacrifice herself? Was she prepared to lose who she was in order to save everyone else? The collector loomed closer, its presence pressing down on her chest like a weight. The whispers from the lost souls grew louder, urging her to surrender, to join the eternal cycle. And then she heard the voice again. The voice that had spoken to her earlier, the doppelganger. "Return the fabric. Return what you took." But what did that mean now? How could she return something when she had already crossed the threshold? The fabric was now woven into the city, into everything. There was no going back. Unless she was willing to sacrifice something even greater than her memories. Her thoughts whirled as she turned toward the clothesline again. It was like a vision in front of her, pulling her in, showing her what had happened when she first left her clothes outside. The cycle was never ending, but there was something she could do, something she had the power to change. Without thinking, she took a step forward, feeling the weight of the choice she was about to make. The air around her crackled, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "You cannot fight destiny, Ifunanya." The collector's voice trembled with fury. But it was too late. The sacrifice had already been made. The air felt heavier now, laden with the promise of something profound about to unfold. Ifunanya stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the clothesline, where the fabric of her fate lay intertwined with the cursed threads of the city. The sacrifice had been made, but what was the cost? Would she truly escape? Or had she merely bound herself deeper into the twisted cycle of the unseen world? The collector loomed before her, a dark silhouette against the fractured cityscape, its form shifting like a shadow caught between realms. It watched her intently, its eyes glimmering with a strange satisfaction. "You think you can outwit me, don't you?" The collector's voice was an unsettling mix of amusement and disdain. "You are nothing more than a thread, woven into a larger pattern. The cycle is unbreakable. You should have known this from the start." Ifunanya's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't be sure what was real anymore. The city around her felt like a dream, each corner twisting and shifting, a labyrinth that trapped her in its dark embrace. But one thing was certain, she had to fight back. The sacrifices had always been made, lives lost, memories stolen, and identities erased. The collector had seen it all before, and yet, Ifunanya was still standing. The sacrifice she had made was not the end, it was the beginning of something new, something dangerous. Her mind flashed back to the moment when she had made the choice, when the voice had guided her to step forward and touch the fabric. There had been a surge of energy, like the very essence of the city had responded to her. But what had it meant? Had she simply joined the others, becoming just another lost soul? Or had she unlocked something hidden within the fabric of this cursed city? A sharp gust of wind blew past, swirling around her, and the clothesline trembled in response. The spirits, the Ague spirits, were no longer just passive observers. They were awakening, stirred by the disturbance in the fabric. They could sense the change, and they were eager to claim what was theirs. You cannot break the pattern, Ifunanya. The collector's voice grew louder, more menacing. It is too late. You have already become a part of it. But Ifunanya was determined. She had faced countless trials, and the thought of becoming just another pawn in this endless cycle made her blood run cold. There had to be another way. The wind howled through the streets, and the city seemed to groan in response. The fabric of reality itself was being torn, threads unraveling before her eyes. Ifunanya took a deep breath, gathering the last remnants of her strength. She had to act, and she had to act now. What if I choose not to join? Ifunanya's voice rang out, steady and determined. What if I reject the cycle completely? The collector paused, its shadow flickering in the moonlight. There was a flicker of uncertainty in its form, as if it hadn't anticipated her question. You cannot reject what has already been chosen for you. You are already part of the pattern woven into the fabric of this world. There is no escape. But Ifunanya wasn't listening anymore. She had made her choice, and now she would embrace it. With a final, determined step, she reached out and touched the clothesline, feeling the fabric ripple beneath her fingers. The Ague spirits reacted immediately, their whispers rising into a deafening crescendo. The wind picked up, swirling around her like a violent storm. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. Time itself appeared to freeze as Ifunanya stood there, her fingers wrapped around the fabric, holding on as the spirits clung to it, desperate to take hold. And then, the ground beneath her feet cracked, sending a shockwave through the city. The Ague spirits howled, their forms materializing all around her, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. They were no longer just whispers in the wind, they were alive, their presence suffocating. Ifunanya's heart raced, but she held her ground. The city itself seemed to be rejecting her, the fabric of reality tugging at her like a drowning man grasping for air. But she refused to let go. I choose my fate. The words came from deep within her, a declaration of defiance. I choose freedom. The collector's form flickered violently, its shape distorting as the very air around it twisted. The city groaned once more, and the threads of the world began to unravel. The Ague spirits writhed, caught between two worlds, as the power of the sacrifice surged through Ifunanya. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The wind fell silent. The city stood still. Ifunanya opened her eyes. The collector was gone. The Ague spirits had dissipated, their presence fading into the ether. The clothesline remained empty. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the city felt peaceful. Ifunanya stepped back, her breath shallow but steady. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. Or had she? As the city began to settle, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, waiting in the shadows. Something that would come for her again, eventually. The curse wasn't over. It was just beginning. And just as she turned to walk away, she heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, whisper in her ear. You cannot escape. The chilling word sent a shiver down her spine. Ifunanya's heart raced as she stood still, her body tense, the voice lingering in her mind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. You cannot escape, it echoed, growing louder, as though the words were meant to carve themselves into her soul. She turned, her eyes scanning the dark streets around her. The city seemed eerily still, but the sense of wrongness was palpable. The air was thick with something ancient, something that had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Her steps echoed down the empty street as she made her way back toward the heart of the city, where it all had started. The city, Ahiara, had always felt like a place of secrets, a place where the past and present intertwined. But now, in the aftermath of her choice, it felt like the very fabric of the world was unraveling. The curse had not been broken, it had only shifted. The realization hit her like a wave, crashing over her with undeniable force. The sacrifice wasn't about saving herself or escaping. It was about understanding that she was part of the cycle. She had never been a simple bystander. She was a link in a long, unbroken chain, woven into the fabric of the city's history. And no matter how much she resisted, she was forever bound to it. As she walked deeper into the heart of Ahiara, the atmosphere seemed to change. The familiar sights, once comforting and homelike, now looked alien, as though she were walking through a dream. The Agwe spirits were watching her, their glowing eyes peering from every shadow, their whispers growing louder with each step. But it wasn't just the spirits. There were others. Darker figures, more tangible, their forms flickering in and out of existence, as though they too were bound by the same curse. Ifunanya could feel their eyes on her, sensing their hunger, their desire for something she couldn't yet understand. She had broken the cycle of the Agwe spirits, but she had not broken the cycle of the city itself. The cloth, the fabric of reality that she had interacted with, was the key. It was always the cloth. It had weaved the city's past, present, and future together, stitching everything into a never-ending loop. The collector had tried to warn her. It had told her that the sacrifice wasn't the end. It had told her that something else awaited her. And now, she knew what it was. The real curse wasn't about the clothes left outside at night. It wasn't about the spirits or the shadows. It was about the city itself. The threads that connected its people, their fates, their histories, and their choices. Every single person who had ever lived in Ahiara had been part of this endless cycle, and Ifunanya, whether she liked it or not, was no exception. But there was more. Much more. As Ifunanya wandered through the empty streets, she arrived at the central square of the city, where the great cloth had once been hung, a symbol of the city's connection to the unseen world. It was said that whoever could tear the cloth would break the curse, freeing Ahiara from its endless cycle of suffering. But none had ever succeeded. Now, standing before the fabric, woven into the heart of the city, Ifunanya realized the truth: the cloth wasn't just a symbol. It was alive. It was the center of the curse, the heartbeat of the city, and its threads intertwined with the very souls of every person who had ever lived here. Ifunanya reached out, her fingers brushing against the woven fabric, and instantly, a surge of energy flowed through her. She could feel it, the lives of everyone who had ever been touched by Ahiara, the endless pain and sorrow, the endless sacrifice. It was all connected. The voices grew louder, and the wind howled, whipping around her as the city began to change once more. The Agwe spirits circled above, their whispers turning into screams, and the fabric of the city seemed to twist and tear. The ground shook beneath her feet, and for a moment, it felt as though the very foundations of Ahiara were about to collapse. But Ifunanya did not pull away. Instead, she embraced the power flowing through her. The curse was not just something that could be fought with force. It was something that needed to be understood, something that had to be witnessed and accepted. And then, as though a veil had been lifted, the truth became clear. Ifunanya was not just a participant in the curse. She was its guardian, its keeper, the one who would either preserve the cycle or destroy it. She had always known that the city was bound by a greater power, but now, standing in the heart of it, she understood her role in the grand design. "You cannot escape, Ifunanya." The voice of the collector echoed again, but this time, it was different. There was no malice in its tone, only a sense of inevitability. "You are the one who holds the balance now. The choice is yours. Will you continue the cycle, or will you tear it apart?" Ifunanya stood still, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The city waited, holding its breath, as if it too understood that this was the moment everything would change. But as she stood there, torn between the two paths, the cycle and freedom, a sudden realization struck her: she couldn't do it alone. No one person could. The city was more than just its cursed cloth. It was the people, the spirits, the lives that had been bound together for centuries. If she was to break the curse, she would have to do so with them. And so, she made her choice. I will free them. All of them. The ground shook once more, but this time it wasn't with destruction. It was with renewal. The Agwe spirit screamed in unison as the fabric of reality began to tear, slowly at first, then with greater force. Ifunanya had begun to unravel the curse, but it would take more than one person to complete it. A light shone from within her, and the cloth began to fade, its dark influence receding. But in the distance, she saw something, someone. A figure emerging from the shadows, their face hidden beneath the veil of night. And as Ifunanya stared at the figure, a new sense of dread filled her. The cycle wasn't just about breaking the curse. It was about the darkness that would always rise from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reclaim its power.